have a presentation in 2 days. It's not my time yet.
It's not your time.
Seriously, why wouldn't you?
Because I'm not. Why is this? I don't understand. This is on.
It's on.
And now this is still on.
Yeah.
So how do we
Turn it off.
Do this thing. It's still on.
Yeah, but I don't know what off is at this point.
Why would you
Because you are the panelist.
Yeah, but you're the
I will just do a very brief presentation, don't worry. I will introduce everything and then I will sit.
No, it's open. It's open, okay? No.
Sí, no quería, no
Yes,
quería pagar.
sorry, I'm making a mess. No. No,
No, we were just trying to whisper.
just
and
do
not
like
be-
on top.
So this doesn't tap,
Yeah,
but
only
because
that
I think
one.
that
It's
that
always
taps. But I guess they're gonna open it if I start.
So it's already open.
But no.
Why are you worried?
Just want to mess up with it. We get all the visibility from them.
What is this for?
For me.
So they decided I need to sit here. Sorry, they are my advisory board and they just advise intensely. Well, we wait 2 more minutes. Yeah, and it's still break time, so I think some people will join a bit later. Everyone have a lot of it's just full of friends.
Your brain.
Is it open? No. This is not. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. So, we are slowly starting this session. Please take a seat. Thank you so much for joining us after the coffee break. It's really great to be here hosting this session on participatory AI and social justice. I am Maria Luce Lupetti. I'm an assistant professor in design at Politecnico di Torino in Italy, and I'm co-organizing this panel together with Christina Harrington, who's a research scientist at Google and affiliate faculty at Carnegie Mellon University, and unfortunately she could not be here with us today. And then I'm also co-organizing with Massimo Menichinelli, who will serve as moderator for the panel, and he is an associate professor and director of research at Elisava, Barcelona School of Design and Engineering. We have 4 amazing panelists: Cristina Zaga, assistant professor at University of Twente; Laura Forlano, full professor at Northeastern University; Alessandro Boson, full professor at Delphi University of Technology; and Vera Liao, associate professor at University of Michigan. So, we are here to talk about participatory AI because more or less we all believe that doing participatory AI allows us to develop AI systems that can better reflect the values, preferences, and needs of users and other impacted stakeholders. So this is our ambition. And we know this has been a growing topic into the CHI community, the HCI community in general, because we have seen sessions dedicated to this topic. There is a SIGCHI, special interest group on participatory AI that this year gathered in Salerno for CHI Italy, for instance. And regularly we have workshops at CHI and other relevant conferences in the field of HCI really focusing on participatory AI. And for the 2nd year now, there has been a dedicated symposium that bridges academia with professional practice on participatory AI. So this field is really growing, and together with a more massive presence, we also see a growing critique around these practices. So there is a growing body of literature in HCI that is trying to underscore how participatory AI brings a lot of value and holds a lot of promises, but at the same time, from a social justice perspective, it is also very tricky to practice. So we are here today to discuss what are the complexities and how tricky it is to practice participatory AI. We will have a first round of introductions from each panelist and the moderator too, and then we have an open chair panel format. That means that we will have an open chair, and any person can actually sit on the panel and have a dialogue together with us. And just to give you an idea of how it will work, you will see a GIF introducing each question, and if the GIF is inspiring for you, triggers some curiosity, you can decide to join. And each question will be discussed for about 10 minutes, so you will not be taken hostage, you can go back. And yeah, that's it, basically. So, oh, and if you jump on the panel, please just introduce yourself with your name and affiliation. This was my very brief introduction. I will leave the floor to Massimo, so enjoy.
Good afternoon, everyone. Buona tarde, buenas tardes. I am Massimo Menichinelli. Thanks, Maria Luce, for organizing this, for the introduction. I will just give a very brief introduction of myself. Now we have around 2 minutes. So my role is only of moderator. So launching the question, try to provoke maybe you if the GIF are not enough provocation. And what I can say, well, I'm here, a professor in Elisava in Barcelona, oldest design school in Spain, now as Faculty of Design Engineering in University of Vic, University of Central Catalonia. I've been working for now more than 20 years on how community can collaborate, especially communities that are different in different places. They don't know each other, or community also that have different sub-communities that then don't know how to collaborate. Mainly started from design and then new media. There are a couple of things that are relevant here. I will say one is typical in design. Yes, we work with users in participation, but typically also we tend to think that every artifact that is designed is perfect and nobody can modify it. I will tell you, no, actually we have to modify them. So for many years, been working in the maker movement, democratizing technology, and also approaches for modifying and reappropriating technology as much as possible, of course. Recently, we've been working also out expanding this and seeing how to actually make it feasible and to really have a real impact. So, for example, researching diversity, equality, inclusion, and design with the DDES project or AI and design education, the Renaissance project. Laura?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Laura Forlano. I'm a professor at Northeastern University in Art and Design and Communication Studies. I think about this topic from the perspective of disability. I identify as disabled. I'm type 1 diabetic, and I use a sensor and insulin pump, which are smart technologies that include software, algorithms, machine learning, a lot of the dynamics related to data. So what interests me is thinking about how we can one, prevent the worst harms of some of the existing systems that, especially in the medical space, but also, throughout society. And also then, of course, how we can provide examples for alternatives using art practice and craft and design for those imagined speculations and provocations.
Shall I continue? Okay. I'm Cristina Zaga. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Twente, and I'm the head of the JEDI network, which is a social justice and AI network in the Netherlands. And I'm also a community organizer, and I'm now leading a semi-political coalition in the Netherlands to try to resist joyfully the plans that are in place in Europe and in the Netherlands about AI developments. So I would say that I'm a researcher, but I'm also a designer and a community organizer. And I really think that, especially here at SIGCHI, we should rethink why we are designing technology. And we should rethink technology as not the magic wand that is going to bring all the benefits in the world, but really think what it needs to be done and why, and if it is technology, then yes, maybe we should do that. So in general, my work is primarily methodological. I partner up with workers, with patients, with unions, with movements that are already active. And we try to bring about social, epistemic, and environmental justice through making our hands dirty and try to really rethink the infrastructures, not only in terms of what type of technology we should design, what type of interaction we should make, but really as Gramsci would say, organic intellectuals, to really think about how we can serve the community with knowledge. And therefore, I think that participatory AI is a form of solidarity and resistance, but also as regeneration. And it names a choice that we need to rethink how we are working with the systems of power. And we really need to genuinely work with the communities that are typically just subjected to technological choices. And I think thereby we need a solidarity stack in which we co-own and co-design, and in case also contest the technology. And this is something that needs to trickle down not only in the design pipeline, but also in policy and in general in the bigger societal narratives. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's not just about responsible AI, and it's not just about safety, or it's not just about ethics. It's really uniting ourselves as people to rethink about the relations we have with technology and with other people in the world.
Hi, my name is Vera Liao. I'm an associate professor at the University of Michigan. My research is on human-AI interaction, responsible AI, particularly around transparency, explainability. So I'm relatively new to this academic job. I started last fall. Before that, I spent 9 years in industry, so IBM research, then Microsoft research. So I haven't spent the majority of my research career in the industry. I think compared to my fellow panelists, I probably do less of truly participatory, community-driven work. But I think I have some visibility into, in the commercial world, how AI technology is attempted to make more inclusive or not made inclusive. And now I've left that world, I'm also free to speak bad things about my former employer. But jokes aside, I'm hoping to bring some perspectives about the pragmatics and challenges designers face in making AI more inclusive, responsible, particularly drawing from our years of work studying responsible AI practitioners and rethinking the role of designer in this whole responsible AI development.
Works, thank you. Hello everyone, buenas tardes. My name is Alessandro Bozzon. I'm a professor in Delft, University of Technology, Human-Centered AI. I've been asked to take like an engineering perspective today. I have my engineer hat, even though I'm working with a lot of brilliant designers and human-computer interaction scientists, being one myself. So in the past, I've been doing quite some work in AI or around AI, crowd computing, so approaches to combine human intelligence with machine intelligence, citizen science, human-in-the-loop machine learning. So coming from the engineering side, spent a lot of time building platforms and pipelines for participation, and I'll get to that in a second. Doing so, I somehow came to a couple of realizations that I would like to share with you today. One is that, to my mind at least, AI is naturally participatory, depending on how you define participation, of course. In a way, it builds upon the work of people labeling data, feedback loops, RLHF. So those are all acts of participation. So of course, the question is whether this is recognized, valued, governed, all invisible labor in the end, right? Dressed up as data and sold, perhaps marketed as participation. So that's a force to contend with, right? This whole idea that being human-centered AI is already for humans. It's part of our imaginary. We have to deal with it. The other one, maybe a little bit more philosophical, more conceptual, is this tension that is intrinsic in the technology itself between scalability and situatedness. So the engineering perspective as an impulse towards generalizability and scalability that naturally works against this situated, power-aware, long-term relationship that are of the participatory approaches we want, right? So we build pipelines that optimize for throughput and consistency, and by doing so, we hinder participation, the type of relations that requires slowness, context, disagreement, the sort of engagement that makes technology truly owned. So what I advocate for is a shift from this narrative of human-centered towards one which is more world-centered, if it makes any sense, where we make AI accountable to communities, ecologies, infrastructures, and not just individual users or companies in that sense. The Netherlands, and I think, and I'm done, I got the cue. We are a proud owner of one of the most known examples of AI screw-up that actually led to even some government falling, sort of. Some narratives say that. So that means that there has been quite an attempt from public organizations to create accountability around AI and making AI more participatory. Just to give you an example, the municipality of Amsterdam has a public registry of AI systems, one of the first worldwide, at least first in the Netherlands. And after years of running that, the municipality, been working with them, came to realization that transparency is not sufficient, right? So the idea that making a system transparent makes it more participatory is not enough, right? So some different forms of participation, accountability, shared decision-making must be put in place. And alas, we do not have either the engineering infrastructure to enable that so yet. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So now we're being introduce yourself. It's time for engaging in dancing. So first question, let's say it's easy question. It could be worse. Could be what is technology, what is design, how do we define participation? But the way I would like to launch the question is please define from your perspective, your own and also situated embodied perspective. So not necessarily the universal, or please don't do the universal definition. What will be your definition? And also from the audience. If you really like this question, please join the empty seat.
Yeah, while others might be getting their thoughts together to come up. I define participation as labor. That is the labor that it takes to care for our devices, and that might be unpaid labor or that might be paid labor. So we could think about new ways of, distributing the profits that are created in these systems. And so I'm very interested in thinking about participation as work, and that's something that we write about in a recent paper called Participation is Not a Design Fix for Machine Learning with Mona Sloan and several colleagues.
Yeah, if I may add, so I agree with you. I think we share that definition. And to me, I would like to add that it's also a matter of ownership, but really owning the actual technology, also like the materiality of it, and governing it. Because eventually, if you participate only into ideation or conceptualization, you don't enter the actual system, you don't enter the entanglement. It's a bit of a co-optation, a patronizing co-optation, so to say, that you are just tapped on the back for a second. So I think definitely it's a form of labor, but it's also, I don't want to sound too communist too soon, but yeah. So it's a form of shaping reality. So what we see, what we think, what we do, and what we say, and it's a form of shaping empires, like economies. I'm speaking about AI. Thereby, participation in AI is actually a form of democratic social engagement. So it's labor to get into a democratic social engagement that also challenges the power dynamics. Yeah.
I don't have much to add to the definition, but as we're setting the stage, I want to kind of bring two perspectives. One is, I do think in reality, there's a spectrum of participation. A lot of the paper we just cited, for example, are instance letters, other work trying to develop frameworks, right? So I think more useful thinking of is not necessarily kind of a one-dimensional scoring system, but we have to also think of as trade-off, right? As we move up the ladder, we have more power redistribution, we can afford more decision-making power, but it does come with certain cost of the effort of doing the research and a cost for the participant. When we think of as trade-off, it's also not to say some level of participation is better than nothing, that kind of cues, but a beginning point to reason about what are the conditions that necessary certain level of participation, what are we losing, that kind of discussion. And another perspective is more specific to participatory AI. I think AI is a particular technology, has particular process. So I'm hoping that the discussion can be more concrete and also open-minded, broad, right? I think the common discussion is about where in this AI development life cycle we can have entry point of shape AI particular technology. But I also think about participation can go beyond the development, right? The governance, the resistance. We also think about in my lab, how do we shape what's the norm of appropriate use, right? So I'm hoping to hear that kind of discussion as well today as we set up stage.
I find this the most difficult question of all, right? Because I think participation definition depends also on your political stance, right? And that sets the course for everything else. If I don't know, if I have to take my own angle, in addition to what has been shared, which I agree upon wholeheartedly, I would say access is a condition for participation, and access, broadly speaking, right? So access to decision making, access to the designing, to the engineering, to the control, to the contestation. And more, I'm starting to think that given the nature of technology itself, we had a fantastic keynote today, right, about technology and the purpose of technology. I think real access to technology, so literacy and the level of capability and skill required to contend and maybe even not needing the sort of infrastructure that others afford you in order to use the technology, that's the ultimate type of participation. If you can do it yourself, then you can. And among the technologies we have, it seems to me that right now AI is one of the, is one that it's not really amenable to participation as it is being shaped.
Can I add something to this, which I also agree with? Then the question would be participation about what? Participating into what? Right? Because there's a level in participating into, for example, knowledge production, and then you can try to support epistemic justice. But then you can also think about more concrete types of participation in whatever pipeline of the development or the governance or et cetera. But then there is also a higher level of participation, which is really then the more contesting part, which is about, is technology a form of power over other people that redefines like systems and economies? Then what are you participating in? And who is co-opting this participation? So I think maybe we should eventually also discuss this later on, maybe also with the audience.
By the way, does anyone would like to jump on the stage and give another definition of participation?
Nice.
Please, it's a panel about participatory AI, huh? So by the end of this, there should be some participation.
I can just jump in with perhaps some inspiration for those of you who maybe want to jump on the stage. One of the things I learned in the last couple weeks through a colleague of mine, Ilya Vidrin, who's a dancer by training, is doing incredible theater performances in which two people stand facing each other, and they're doing a lot with, you could say, the sensors that can, you can do, of course, motion capture, but what these sensors are doing is pressure sensing, and they're affixed to the arms and legs of the dancers, and when the dancers put their hands next to each other, like this way, they are pushing against one another, but you don't perceive with the visual eye anything, but the sensor, of course, can tell how much pressure is pushing. And what's so interesting about it, why does it relate to this conversation, is because essentially it's about learning how to be in relation with other people. And his work is called Proxies. It's all about critiquing computation in various ways. And it applies to pedagogy, like the classroom, learning how to participate in the classroom, learning how to participate in a conference, right? And I really do think it's about going back to very basic forms of being together as a starting point, for what it's worth.
If it helps with participation, I'm happy to bring up my step counts and just come to you. Did that help? Yeah? Cool. Can do that. Don't care.
Hi, I feel participation also means joy. So the joy does not only means that the participant should get like compensation, like a good amount of compensation, especially if you are working with like marginalized communities, like low-income communities, and you are trying to retrieve data from them. When they are when you are conduct works related to AI to them, they are, from my perspective, they are left behind compared with people with higher level of education background. Like they are left behind with using AI or stuff like that. So from this from this perspective, the joy is the first phase is about like the compensation there, and the second phase is also about whether the participation could help them fix like get some work done. So the second phase is like, so for example, I was working with a platform called BizChat, which was helping entrepreneurs from minority background write their business plans. So in this way, we use AI to help them generate the business plans, which also helps them like get their job done, because some of them just really need a business plan to access capitals, because for these folks with limited education background, they are not able to write a 10 pages or like 15 pages of business plan by their own. So with the help of AI, they can help, they can use our website to get some like work done. So the second phase, like the joy means to get the work done. And the third phase, the joy also means that you are building like a long-term partnerships with the participants there. So you are not actually just using your participants as like a one-time data sources there. You're actually building a very long-term, maybe like even 5 years or like 10 years partnerships there, so that the participants really feel that you are not just a researcher, you are really people who really care them, and they can feel like the joys from these three phases. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to reply? No?
I think that's such a great point. I mean, I'll just add that the transformation that has to occur within the researcher, the designer, the computer scientist, in order to allow for the scaffolding, in order to create the conditions for participation, is a pretty big transformation that you need to go through in order to do that kind of work. So I think anyone who's interested, you do start changing the way that you're approaching your topic and your communities. Yeah.
I think definitely joy is an important factor within any relation of participation, despite that is in research or beyond. But then we need also to be a bit, I call it keeping it a bit real, in the sense that if making them happy is a paternalistic activity which you let them play around, you give them something, and then even if you have a relationship, it's still an asymmetrical relationship that it's a bit extractive in the sense that we gain much more than they gain because we get data, we get the publication, and then that we get a project out of that or whatever. Then we need always to check, to have reflexivity into participation, because otherwise we also typically perpetuate those asymmetries that we would like maybe to bridge. So definitely joy also comes from awareness of the different type of agencies that are at play.
I will jump to the next question because we're already touching not just what could be participation, but what makes a good participation, what makes good participatory AI and for a designer and researcher, so both researcher and practitioner.
Shall we ask the engineer?
Being a good engineer? No? No. Generosity, I would say, is a starting point, right? The generosity of mind, generosity of thought, and of action. And the end of the day is about giving away the sort of power, if you want, that you have when you're setting the stage for a particular project. Level of humbleness, epistemologically or otherwise, right? So just assuming that even if you thought that the reason why you're doing something is the right one, you might have to be proven wrong, and you need to be open to that, which of course is a bit against, the whole dynamic we have in research where, we have our project and we have our ideas that we needed to bring forward. So people that, are somehow expecting results, but.
Adding to that, I think a concrete thing I think about is I think the designer or researcher should be willing to and have the skill to be a good translator. So I think about participatory design, designers should move away from the decision-making role of power, but I think of their role more of setting up the right environment, procedure to have meaningful participation. And I think a common pushback, people say we don't do truly participatory. The pushback is, oh, the stakeholder don't have the right AI literacy. And I often think, AI literacy sometimes is a bit of a cop-out. I think it is the designer's job to be a good translator there, right? That requires understanding the technology well and then translate that to the participants. We have a lot of tools in our design toolkits to do that, right? And the other end as well, especially in this kind of more commercial AI development, the roles are more separated. The designer needs to bring that insights back into the team. That's another layer kind of translation that I think fall on the designer's role as well.
I would say getting very comfortable with friction, failure, conflict, disagreement. Pictures of people smiling at the end of a workshop are not really very interesting in the end of a day because usually the interesting learnings are much more challenging and difficult. I saw a moment of this happen last week at a disability symposium at Yale, actually, with a panelist and their parents who were there as caretakers, and the parents were very worried about the panelist, who's a younger guy, who is visibly distressed in the moment. And so the parents were kind of screaming at the other people on the panel. And I saw, on the one hand, I was pretty freaked out. I was like, oh, what is going on here? And on the other hand, I saw, after the panel, all of the panelists come up and sit down with the parents and talk about, well, what were you worried about? And we were really trying to include, your son in this conversation. And it was very tense, and it continued for like 30 minutes after the panel, but it was like literally people sitting on the floor trying to work together to understand what had gone wrong, and not to paper it over or resolve it really at all, actually to be comfortable with the fact that it was probably not going to be totally resolved. But I think that's an indication of what it takes to be comfortable with like participatory design, but in this case, like participatory AI.
I mean, I agree with most of what has been said. I think you can never be good. So, I mean, you can never be good. And also, what is good? Typically, what I try to do is really disappear, which is impossible because how can you do that? But learn from the communities not only means just hearing them or whatever, but really go to what they're doing, their places, etc. So I was just in Berlin for a conference which was organized by tech workers unions, workers against Tesla unions, and etc. It was called Cables of Resistance. And I could have spoken because I'm doing this for 15 years already, but I just wanted to hear what they're doing, how they're organizing, how they're working together, how are they learning about things. And what I think it's important is to be able to stay, and I will drop it, I'm sorry, to stay in the trouble, in the situation, understanding what relationships are already at play, what understandings are already at play, and not be willing to just bring whatever you think and whatever you want to do. Which means, and I will be a bit provocative here, which means that you can never be a good researcher because you will never have the perfect paper that gets published at SIGCHI or gets published anywhere really. You will never be able to easily convince people that gives you money to give it to you because it's open-ended and you need to figure it out in the context with the people. Therefore, I think we need all together to figure it out what does it mean to do this job and seeing it at least recognized or supported. Because eventually that's the main issue, because I don't think we should just do this to publish papers, but to activate change. It sounds a bit corny, but I mean, you know what I mean? And that is something that you cannot really measure in any way. It's gonna be something that maybe is gonna yield a good thing in 10 years. So we are doomed to fail and to have difficulties in talking to the engineers that we love and that we like to code, not vibe code, but really code with, or just tinker and whatever, and then to disappointed policymakers that they just want a blueprint or give me regulations or whatever. And it's also, so the point is that we cannot get a solution, and thereby we are always going to fail. But we can instantiate a set of movements, a set of relations, a set of way of being and way of thinking about our relation with technology and with the world. And that's something that is very rewarding. So I don't think I can be a good researcher. I can just try to be a good community partner.
Any participation to this question? No? Yes, because technically if
I
you're
see
not a
so
panelist,
many- No,
you're the audience, so you can participate.
I see so many inspiring community-based researchers in the room. I know someone has an opinion about this. That's true.
You
wanna
can
say that?
participate.
Yeah, I was saying it's also okay not to participate, as we will discuss later.
Refusal.
Yes, I still have the role of trying to make you participate.
Oh, yeah.
It's a hard job, as you can see. So what are the key differences between grassroots and corporate forms participatory AI?
Oh, that's
Oh,
nice.
yes.
You don't need to answer that one.
I can segue
You can
into
answer
that.
the previous one.
Previous question.
No, that's okay. I can do both. But I think the thing about refusal is actually really interesting. It's a tall order to come and sit next to you on the stage. You've got to really be feeling your, I don't know, feeling yourself to do that. But I think it's also part of what I wanted to say is that the thing that is the risk about participatory design, the fault line, is that it is so easy for it to become a way to manufacture consent and agreement. And we are all very good at this. And we don't want to be good at this. We want to be, like Christina's saying, we want to be invisible, we want to listen. But our presence is so incredibly loud in these spaces. And, you know, it's very, very difficult to not somehow charm or entertain or joy people into, you know, giving us some of the things that we want. And we make choices in the outcomes. There are certain things we take note of and other things we might not take note of. And we are maybe even sometimes annoyed when people don't want to participate in this thing that we have carefully designed. And I think that these are the things, so these are all things that makes us bad participatory researchers. And that's kind of, I wanted to sort of like continue what Christina was saying, in that it's extremely difficult to do this right, because you gotta find a way to let somebody else be the boss and maybe the initiator. And you have to be okay with the outcome not being about the subject that you got a grant for. Because that could very easily happen. It happens most of the time, actually, where people go, no, you know that thing? Not interested. Let's talk about something else. So, anyway. I think that's what I got.
Any more comments? No? Yes. Well, you can also join here.
In the meanwhile, maybe, I wonder, based on your comment, if science and scientists are the right people to even do participatory, probably not, right?
So
Probably the wrong people to do it.
I don't really have an answer, but I have a question that I'd like the panel to engage in, which is, what is the difference of participatory AI designer or researchers compared to a traditional participatory researcher or participatory designer? Like, where does that happen? What's the detail there? Because we know a lot of participatory research. We know how it's painful and so on. So what does the AI change, or does it change anything? Oh, yes, Matti from Helsinki.
I think everybody is... to my mind, that's a fantastic question. What's different about AI? I think at this point in time is half imaginaries and half technological consequences. Maybe add a third element that doesn't come to mind. But the thing is that we are all somehow operating as there is an inevitability to that, and long-term consequences to that somehow demand the different intensity to it, and a sense of urgency, combined with the ethereal nature of AI, right, and how mystical it is, that rejects some easy level of inclusion, right? Because, oh, what is AI? Can I even do it, right? I mean, what is that? So it doesn't make it that different, probably, but somehow different.
But I think one thing that is different if I would just look at my own context and thinking about just the medical systems that I'm using and the visions of the manufacturers, which is to take the human out of the loop and make more and more automated versions, which by very nature turns like your own body into a black box, because you can't even access the understandings that you could access with the current versions, which are kind of hybrid closed-loop systems where you have some ability to interact with it. So, or if you go back to a more analog option where you have much greater understanding of what's going on, perhaps, right? So I think that that's where things get very opaque, because of the push to make things more automated is actually where the human is further removed from the system. So if you just think about the latest versions of automobiles, right? Like, you can't fix your own car anymore, whereas you used to be able to do that,
Yes. Maybe. Okay. Oh, if there is another comment, it's also okay.
Hi, Chris Framberger, ITU Austria. I just want to add two things. I want to second what Christina said. There is the tyranny of participation. Not every participation is necessarily good. So I think we also, as researchers, need to be very conscious about facilitating participation in the right kind of ways, and that's a quote marks here. And the other thing, what is different about AI, I think what we can say is that the material agency has become much more visible than it used to be with digital technologies, or even non-digital technologies. They've never been neutral, as we know, but I think what has happened with AI is that the way it acts and interacts in the world autonomously, seemingly very far from any human oversight or democratic control, has produced systems that are extremely difficult to engage in participatory ways. And I think that's a thing that participatory design needs to kind of evolve into. It's not new for the field. It has done that all the time. But I think, again, we need to kind of think about what these new technical environments kind of mean for our methods, for our approaches, and the way we engage communities and people around these technologies.
I want to just touch on that, because I think participatory design, the way of the 70s, it was also about confronting ourselves with technology, but there was a big difference back then, that we knew that we were different from technology, and it was not so confrontational. So those were tools, they were means of production, they were not well done, or no, I will not say optimized, but they were something that were exploiting us. We want to redefine them, all right. But AI also has this confrontational aspect about our own humanity, our own existence, and our own coexistence and symbiosis with nature and the environment. And all of this is very metaphysical and metaphorical, but that brings about that type of mystique and magic that creates a moment in which you are not just talking about designing a tool and a system of production, you are almost redefining the ontology and epistemology of the word, right? So I don't want to cite Sam Altman, but whatever, but when Sam Altman says, oh, well, you know, it costs so much to grow a human, why should we worry about the environmental cost of AI, then it's not the same thing as saying we should build a machine for the Ford factory. So that level needs to be worked out in a different way, and it requires a discussion and an entanglement that is of another level. And as Christopher was saying, we cannot get it right. There's nothing to get right. We are also complicit. I am complicit. I have developed technology and accepted money to develop technology in ways that do not make a lot of sense. My PhD was about, hey, take a robot and use the robot to help kids to tidy up. That was a completely useless research question that I did not make, and I'm sorry for my advisor, I love you, but still useless. But that was done to get money and under the assumption that technology can do it all and can, and it's the bullet, a silver bullet for everything, but that's not the way to go. And thereby, participatory AI signal that we also need to rediscuss our relationship with the artificial and why we are engaging in developing the artificial. And we should be the first ones as being complicit that will, you know, enter a reflexivity and a sort of understanding of the way we also extract, oppress, and exploit while doing things that we think they're cool. Sorry, I just made it a bit corny and spicy, but I think we should also get there.
Hello, I'm Alice from the University of British Columbia. I think as we're having this discussion, I'm thinking more and more about how, rather than trying to bridge the gap between researchers and communities, what can we do to inspire the community to be researchers themselves? And I think I'm thinking about like ways in which researchers can make profit or have an incentive to do work in the communities that they already are a part of. And on the flip side, if these communities are not represented in these spaces of academia or industry, then how do we build that capacity for those community members to also kind of seek out these positions of being the researcher? So I think that aspect of like embodiment of community values is what inherently makes a good designer slash researcher slash community member.
We have a question over there.
I also feel like a good participatory AI designer or researcher, the first aspect is about like the disclosure of the AI. So the disclosure of AI means how you make sense of AI to your participants. So I just did a workshop with like participants from like low-income community, and one of the participants say that the AI is about like robots because the AI is cloning my data and make it as a robot of myself. So in this way, before the research starts, when we need to kind of specify how do you like based on the context that you are doing research or design, you need to specify how AI is used, or like how AI, instead of like using like technical jargons like large language models or like tokens or parameters, stuff like that, you need to think about some like ways to let them make sense about what you use AI. And the second part, I think a good participatory AI designer or researcher have is about the consent, about, or like something like opt-in or opt-out of like the AI you use. So the meaning I have is kind of like the consent form should be, if you are building a system, the consent form should be built into the system you are building. Because if your system is using AI, then when you do like the consent form, and the user should be able to have the right to opt in or opt out this research in whatever the process you have, like when using the system. Because one thing I feel a good, maybe like an AI system has, is like, because you are using like your participants' data to do some work there, and if in any of the process that they feel not comfortable with using AI, they are able to opt out in maybe either of the process, then your system could be just adapted to that, so not using the AI from that point. So I think the dynamic opt-in or opt-out is also like makes a good participatory AI designer or researcher. So these two, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I will keep moving to the next question because it's connected with what we've been talking. Just the question before was who is or what is a good participatory designer? The visual cue is just for giving an idea, but a very successful professional. But of course, we can have grassroots and corporate AI. Also because it's not necessarily AI stealing my data, it's someone through AI stealing my data. And there's not necessarily a judgment. It's also that there are two different ways or more different ways of doing AI, and also different way of doing participation, like grassroots and corporate. So we started in the question to put them in polarization, but not necessarily, but just also to have an idea between these two different worlds.
Yeah, I can start. I don't feel like I'm qualified to talk about the difference, because I've been mostly on the evil side. But I can share some concrete observations, how things are done in the corporate world. I think it's probably obvious to see, like in the corporate world, some of the incentive is not aligned, it's not in the KPI, and people are doing some watered down version of participatory AI. But more concretely, I think I have kind of three observations of how it is watered down. One challenge is, I think it's often fall on certain role or individual who don't necessarily have the decision power to actually change technology. So in our observation study, even just responsible AI practice, what we observe is UX researchers, designers, certain kind of role in corporate world, they naturally gravitate towards doing that kind of work. They've always been user-facing, they are passionate about the social justice issue. But then they're not necessarily the one who are close to touching the model. They are often brought in at end stage, the model is already developed. So a lot of that kind of constraints and responsibility fall onto certain individual without clearly defined role, and things will fall through the crack over time, that kind of challenge. Another dimension is there is a tendency of just adapting existing practice. I think a good reference, a useful reference, so Partnership on AI has an inclusive AI design guideline. So this is a nonprofit organization in the US. They often get together industry representative, academics to co-develop toolkits or resource for responsible AI. It's an interesting read. I think it's a good reference, but you can see the language is often how do we adapt marketing research? How do we change data practice a little bit? So I think it's useful to get people into the door, but it definitely still constrains our imagination, what kind of work we can do. And the third, probably most worrisome trend or inclination, some of the paper we cite to discuss is this gravitation towards proxy, right? Either often you have some kind of stand-in. Like it's hard to reach out to community. Let's get domain experts or UX experts who know some version of that. Another trend I think we cannot ignore is right now a lot of this technical AI work or in the corporate, a lot of this kind of participation are now mediated by algorithms as well, right? If you read like participatory AI in AI research, they're often mixed with this kind of AI safety alignment work, often some version of, oh, we need to get community preference, values, but then they naturally move into how do we scale that, right? Let's get a simulation, let's get an algorithm in the loop so we can scale that. We can decide that's not a version of participation, but I don't think we can ignore that trend. That's for the technical community, for the corporate, that's really moving to.
Something maybe quick and provocatory. Grassroots forms rarely end up with having AI in the solution space, right? So, I mean, if they really come from below, right, AI is rarely the solution to the problem that people really have.
But I mean, wouldn't we, I would imagine some of the examples being, you know, say groups that speak a language that, you know, like a rare language or a language that is only spoken by a small number of people, kind of creating and coding their own software to, you know, like I think those are the examples which are small scale LLMs around a certain indigenous language group, or, you know, in the disability space, you have a lot of kind of hack your own technology kind of initiatives, which I would fall under this grassroots. And it's not a strict binary also. I think, you know, I haven't done an analysis of the space, but I think that probably we would find lots of things that might mix the two at various stages. Could be the data, the models, the software, the rollout, that could be complicated as well.
So I think the main difference is that the grassroots, whatever that is, you don't see them. The real thing, you don't see them. I don't think any of us is in actual that space, because, for example, if I ask you, do you know what is platform cooperativism in South America, about DigiLabor and digital solidarity in South America, you might not know it because, or maybe you know it because you are from there, but we don't see it, and typically they're not actually happening in the West. Most of the time, the actual grassroots things that I've seen, because most of the time what happens is that those grassroots initiatives, they start, but then they easily die because they do not have the access to the infrastructure and to the materials, because AI, whatever that means, is very material and very costly at every level. And at the same time, they typically might be adopted by people like us and supported for a bit, but then they lose the support or the momentum and things might go sideways. What I've learned from ONGs that are operating in the European Parliament is that a lot of grassroots movement that they make it are not grassroots anymore. So they are co-opted by corporate, and it's done on purpose to do ethics washing, inclusivity washing, whatever washing you want to do, it's the laundry, they're doing it. And therefore, the main difference is that the corporate forms of participatory AI, they are a bit more sustainable and or visible and or franchised, so to say, and the grassroots are not. And at the same time, there is something in between that is not in this, because there's not only grassroots or corporate, there's also the more governmental activities that are really, really, you know, at the forefront of the European development of AI, I would say, because it's much more from the policy making top-down in Europe. And those forms, they have the same issues of the corporate forms, that they might be nice, they might have nice blueprints that with very nice, the pipeline and the models and the workshops methods, but they end up being always a trade-off between co-optation and extractivism. So that's the main thing. But I think that we need to find much more alliances there, and even with the corporate or even with the engineers, because eventually, just saying, because eventually, indeed, what we need is to share also the material parts that are not so easily accessible. Because you can do a very nice workshops in which you do, a scenario or a conceptualization, or even a nice prototype with a Raspberry Pi and everybody's happy. But then eventually to really build different type of models or not build them at all because they are useless and what are we doing with these, it's a bit different. So what I'm seeing, for example, is that there is much more grassroots movement nowadays that are into the resistance perspective and the refusal perspective than not. And what I'm doing a lot in my spare time, academic spare time, you know what I mean, is to do a digital ethnography of how people are reacting to delivery robots, because most of the time there is even really grassroots movements that are trying to resist to that, or to make sense of it, or to create meaning. And what I notice is that eventually those things might, have a big moment, big momentum, but then they wear off. So I think the grassroots movement needs to be more part of the everyday development of technology as all, not just AI. And by AI, let's also be real, I mean machine learning, mainly people means generative AI, but also more reinforcement learning or models or even robots, automation, all these type of things. So this needs to be much more part of the ingrained way in which we are doing technology, I think. Not because participatory means are always good. They're not. Sometimes they're not even useful at all. But because they could be part and they should be part of the way we're doing things. But then we need to do it a bit more in a frictional unity. I don't know if that even makes sense, but that's the way I think we should go.
Hello, I'm Pejman Sig from Strathclyde. So I feel like there's a few things I want to say. So on some level, I feel like if you simplify the question and you say, what are the key differences between grassroots and corporate forms of X, whatever that placeholder is, I think to a naive mind like mine, the very obvious one is that there's the profit motive for the corporate, which inherently exploitative, uses people, has this perspective of using the people for gathering information and then using them to create profit. Whereas grassroots, I guess, is the opposite of that, whatever that is. But then thinking about, okay, so now what are the key differences between grassroots and corporate forms of, let's forget about participatory, AI, right? So then the question is grassroots AI even possible? How do you do that? Because it seems like, as was mentioned, you require quite a lot of resources to do any sort of meaningful AI. So if I just say, okay, me and my neighbors, we're just going to sit down and create a machine learning algorithm and use our own data, what does that even mean? Is that even possible? I feel like the term participatory there, maybe it wasn't well defined, or I didn't get it, or I feel like it's just misleading there. So maybe if we just talk about grassroots versus corporate AI, and whether it's even possible to do grassroots AI at all, would be interesting. And the government aspect is interesting that was brought in previously, because I feel like the governments, for instance, in the UK are realizing, okay, we're so dependent on US technology in terms of AI, so if they pull out, what are we going to do? The country's going to go to sleep or whatever. But what it seems like what they're supporting is sort of homegrown corporate aspects of creating that technology. I don't think anybody's thinking, oh, let's ask Pejman and his neighbors to create some grassroots AI. If that's possible, I think we should know about that, or how it would be possible. I don't know. Sorry, I talked a lot. I don't know if I brought in anything, but thanks.
Can I just respond? So I think this is the key of everything, because everybody is a capitalist, even in the grassroots, because we have internalized capitalism and neoliberalism. We cannot get it out, right? Because all of us, we think that we value because we produce something, but in reality, we are just mostly oppressed because none of us, I don't know, but none of us here has a lot of capital, so to say, and they're really making the money. So that said as a premise, that's what I think we should be touching upon, and that's not really our role as researchers, if we take that role, is to really rethink the way we are bringing technology in the financial and economical and social economical equation. So if technology that is meant to support our systemic livelihood is owned by a powerful bunch of people, and all the other people are subordinated to that, no matter how we slice it and how many Raspberry Pis we can gather, we cannot go anywhere. So we need to rethink who owns the technology, who governs the technology, and bringing it towards a genuinely democratic perspective, a frictionally democratic perspective, because we will never be equal. There's always a matter of equality and equity that cannot be easily resolved unless you change the complete system, and that I don't think I can manage. And neither we can, all of us, yet, but we will. But the point is that this is the big question, and I think a lot of people in the grassroots movement are trying to do that, rethinking with digital solidarity economies, with degrowth perspectives, and etc. But they typically hit a wall because they cannot branch out. They cannot really find a way to talk to then people that are more on the corporate perspective, or even in a techno-solutionist perspective, because we really then polarize and we cannot find a way. So then the other level is really finding also a solidarity and a dialogue. And again, all of these things that I'm talking about are not things that we need to do at CHI. It's not something that I can bring in a paper, but it's much more of a social movement that we need to engage in, and that means that it's going to be hard and a bit soul, we're going to disrupt ourselves a bit in it because it's a bit of a big change, but I think you are onto something there, just to close it up.
No, I'll say something. Oh, sorry. I don't know why I wanted this. I just want to say thank you because my PhDs are working on this. But please, go ahead. I didn't want to say much more on that, so Laura, please.
No, I would just say, I think you're right to say, for what, like what is the X? And one aspect that, we might discuss is around what are the goals, and I won't even say values, I'll say what are the goals. If the goal is efficiency, of course that's one kind of goal, but then we also know that we have, a full range of other kind of priorities as people, and I think we also want to say what are the communities that are people participating in, or how to even scaffold the participation in communities, because in very, very many ways, people are maybe, technology becoming a mediator. People are not going to community for things that we might have before. So I thought that there was that, I guess you could say the YouTube video or the meme that was created a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was, by, was it I can't even remember now, but I think it was a group of, let's see, it was probably a Peruvian group that wanted to make like an AI refusal, and they picked a certain day, and they said, if you need a recipe, you can ask Maria, or this kind of thing. Like, why are we looking to AI for recipes when we can ask someone's grandmother for a recipe, right? So I think it's about goals and priorities, but also about who are we in conversation with in communities as well, and maybe helping to scaffold those.
Yeah, maybe I will add one thing. I think it also depends on how we look at grassroots initiatives and also at AI development, because if we think there is one line that goes from beginning and to the product launch, that doesn't work, or it's very complicated, but a lot of grassroots initiatives actually exist around digital labor or labor of workers governed by algorithms, and there are unions that have been fighting and gaining some rights, or they managed to actually shape a bit of regulations around those algorithms. And I like to also look at all this space from that perspective. So for me, that's a form of participation in making algorithms change. And yeah, that's one way.
I feel there's like for grassroots, there's like one advantage and one disadvantage compared with like corporate forms of participatory AI. So I can give like each one an example. So for the advantage, I could say grassroots has the trust and the reputation in local communities. So I can give an example. There's a research project called Elevate Black Voices in Howard University in Washington, D.C. So a research team in Howard University has collaborated with Google to collect voice data from the Black people to increase their voice transcription accuracy. Because the Howard University is located within a Black community for a very long time, they have the reputation and trust within the local Black people community. So instead of these participants going directly to Google to collect their data, they were instead going to the Howard University, to that research team, to get their data collected. So in this way, grassroots has an advantage over the big corporation because they have the trust of over these participants, and these participants are willing to get their data collected by their team because the team are all Black people, and they guaranteed to their participants that their data would stay within the Howard University. But there's also another disadvantage about grassroots, which is they have limited resources. So when I say limited resources, particularly regarding the participatory AI, it's about deploying large language model locally. So for giving the context that the business plan, the BizChat project that we have been working on, we want to give the users an option to choose between OpenAI and the open source model that we want to deploy locally, so that their participants' data won't upload to the OpenAI to the third party, and these data will keep within the campus level. But there are so many challenges of deploying a large language model because we don't have such computing resources within our research lab. We are a very small research team with only 3 or 4 people there, and we don't have such equipment there. So instead, we have no choice but to use services on Amazon Bedrock, which has a collaboration contract with our campus, and they say that they have agreement with Amazon that the data will be safe and keep safe. So we don't have a choice but to choose the corporate form of the AI. So that's the one advantage and disadvantage regarding between the grassroots and the corporates. Thank you.
not necessarily a technical question, but the focus shifts a bit more than from the people really on the role of the artifacts in making participatory AI possible. What do you think about it?
Kick it off. Huge role, right? So in the sense that it brings down the materiality of AI into something tangible that can be contended with, right? It can be a boundary object of discussion, of understanding, and all of that. To be honest, I cannot imagine any version of participatory AI without an artifact to play with of any form.
I think more concretely, coming back to my previous comment about being a translator, I think at least in my own experience, artifacts is really useful for this translation purpose. One is, I think a lot of this kind of responsible AI, participatory AI design often comes down to helping people to imagine the social technical risk. And that has two components. One is we have to understand that technical limitation, technical property, and then they can imagine, they can anticipate. So I think the artifacts play a role in that translation part for participants to understand what is the technical property limitation, and also often a very useful tool for us to imagine the social technical.
Yeah, also very interested in this question, especially thinking about the way that artifacts make something relational, because then you have a thing to relate to or a thing to mediate across a group as well. And in my own work, I'm really interested in the role of performance and increasingly drawing on, methods that would be more comfortable in like a theater department, because it also allows that ability to enact a kind of relation. And so, I'm doing this by looking at data sets and doing kind of performative readings of them, but also taking those data sets and physicalizing them using digital knitting, which then allows me to think about the human-machine power asymmetries in the way that some of the medical devices work. So I think artifacts are really helpful in thinking about some of these questions.
Yeah, so just to wake up for the last bit, I always say that artifacts are the Nietzschean moment, is the God is dead, because then when you use it, you understand that it's nothing godlike about whatever we call AI. There's nothing special of it, but it's, in Italian we would say umano troppo umano, so it's very material, it's very tangible, it's almost destructible, right? So it means that in a metaphysical way, it helps to make sense and resonate with something that has been presented to us as ontologically imponent and almost scary. And for the actual activities that we do together, to build together, it's a way to do cognitive unloading, so to really bring something that is in your cognition into fruition and then create relations thereby. So that's very, very useful. And then it's, again, a way also to see what is the cost of making all of these, both in terms of time, of care, of deployment, and etc. And how these type of things sometimes are not the solution we need for certain challenges that we face. So it's a really nice reality check. And I think we should always have our hands dirty when we are working in a participatory manner. And I think that would be also the best way we could discuss this topic amongst us all, really by doing together.
Next question. So well, I can read it, but it's actually simpler. We made now it's the academic question about the impartial view from nowhere characterizing scientific research is incompatible with the participatory approaches to AI. Well, what does it mean? Now we tend to think still in very universal terms, that we really want to the neutral scientific view in AI, but, well, at least in design, for example, we add it in with modernism. Slowly, very slowly, we are losing it a bit. It's about talking not about really, of course, the people behind, the interest behind, but also if you want, the worldview behind, ontologies behind what we are working with. You know, I was thinking, will we have the AI as we have now without Alan Turing? There could be historical, of course, explanation, psychological, but really you have to have a thinking machine that resembles a human. Could it be a different worldview? View is a nice term. The Spanish version for this is cosmovision, which is even broader, but it's also interesting because it's not all the Spanish-speaking countries. Of course, they use the same languages and also they have the same worldview. So.
Okay, but then I will say something that is a bit, so I really like this quote because it makes me think again about Gramsci. This is the Italian political guy that got killed by the fascists. And it was distinguishing two types of intellectuals. There is the hegemonic intellectual that serves the hegemony and serves the systems we're in. And there's the organic intellectual that is aware of the fact that he's part himself, herself, themselves of society, and they chose to, work with them, for them, and then create something that makes sense and brings about change. So I think participatory AI is inherently a job for organic intellectual. You still need maybe hegemonic intellectual somewhere, because you cannot get rid of that type of perspective, especially because in any case academia is a form of power. But I do think that that's the case. But of course, this is a reasoning from the power perspective. The reasoning from the epistemological perspective, so the impartiality, the fact that you are removed from the situatedness of the research, it's something that we still need when we are looking a bit more about phenomena, understanding the phenomena of AI and interaction, how does it play out, and etc. But it might be working against us when we are co-shaping, co-developing, because it's not possible. You need to be part of the knowledge creation, and thereby you are part of a flow, not an external observant. But then it's a different type of research question, a different epistemology, thereby is a different type of methodology. So that's the way I see it. And I see, ciao. Do I need to?
No, I can go ahead. I can do it.
Thank you. Hi, Jesse Benjamin from Eindhoven University of Technology. What you were just saying, Christina, also made me think of something that I was thinking earlier, what Laura was saying about failure as something that you need to be comfortable with as a good, participatory AI researcher. And I feel like what you were just saying with regards to Gramsci, it makes me think of something that Mafalda and I and a couple of people are just trying to articulate as something that you need to be an active nihilist, effectively, as a design researcher in this space, which means rather than being a passive nihilist, giving over to the conventions that are established already, you rather put yourself in the position where you question the grounds on which those even become conventions in the first place, and yet try to actively not necessarily dismantle them, but you just put them to the question, like any form. Which Nolan Gertz at Twente wrote very nicely about. So I think we need to be nihilists, but active, not passive nihilists. So that was something I wanted to add to that.
I was just going to add, so my co-author, Danya Glabo, and I wrote a book called Cyborg, and even though the cyborg is now, several decades old as a feminist concept, and more decades old as kind of a general concept, one of the things we tried to do in the book is come up with 10 principles that are kind of science and technology studies shorthand, I would say, for thinking about this very question. And so situatedness, context, friction, like labor, infrastructure, all the terms that have come up in the discussion today, is kind of to keep those present in one's mind as a kind of critical data studies or kind of critical computing vocabulary. And I think the goal that we had with that project was really to try to, translate what could be, just many, many papers that one would have to read into some kind of juicy concepts that you could grab onto and take into a new research project. So we call it critical cyborg literacy. So yeah. Next.
Yeah. One of the favorite moments in terms of GIF, of course. And if you want, this is even more critical issue, as we said before, also Maria just said before, is it critical to acknowledge that some participation might not be better than no participation? Not necessarily. Would you like to criticize participatory?
We did discuss
AI?
it, so maybe we can, I think if there are 10, we should go to the next.
Yes. Next.
Nice.
So now the question, is participatory AI the best approach to account for social justice in AI system development? If you don't like the question, we can go to the next one, because we also have nicer GIFs later. Yes, nicer GIFs. Okay. How do we ensure long-term sustainability of participatory AI?
Or not?
I mean, the answer to the last two seem to be about redistribution of profit of some kind, but I'm not sure how to achieve that.
Maybe one. Thank you. Keep demystifying the inevitability of technological development in AI. Right? I think as a starting point, at the moment we somehow give up on the fact that something can be different. This is the dead of any form of participation. I suppose the question was actually hinting to something more pragmatic and perhaps monetary or type of support. For that side, honestly, I have no idea, right? I think we've been also discussing today the fact that there is a tension between the goal of a scientific endeavor and the purpose of a participatory action. And so if not even science can be an enabler for that, I wouldn't know what could be. Sorry, I end with a very negative note.
Yeah, I'm a bit pessimist as well. I think maybe one approach is build this into governance structure, right? Whether it's policy, make some kind of requirement. I think that's the way to go. And change that will have the top-down change of all the incentive structures and everything.
So I think you ought to become an activist, not a researcher, as I already said it. And so the way I'm trying to bring participatory AI sustainable is actually to partnering up both with the policy-making side and the political side, and with communities, and also with the receptive industry, which can be very tricky because then you can get into what we...
No AI without batteries?
But yeah, so I think we need to get our hands more dirty with the people that are taking decisions at the moment. And it might not be part of our job description, and we are definitely not paid enough to do that. But I think that's the way to go.
I think, are we at time, or do we have more? We're concluding.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I would just say that thank you all for being here, and I am so inspired by the work of my colleagues here on the panel, And I hope that you take time to look into some of the recent projects that were mentioned today. I think we have kind of a map of some really interesting work. And yeah, I mean, look forward to keep the conversation going over the, I guess, reception tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We had to conclude with the gift of the cat. Sorry, that was the important thing. Thank you so much, everyone.